We're gonna be here for a while, man.
Okay.
Let's start.
Okay.
I want to talk about the political economy of
Yep.
urban black life and how
Okay.
it correlates with the pivot to disco and house. Let
Ooh.
me break it down like this.
Mhm.
We often hear about the Great Migration, the
Mhm.
period of black migration from the South to
Right.
northern cities,
Mhm.
Chicago, Harlem, New York, even to the West as well, particularly Chicago, with Chicago, New York, Detroit, particularly.
Mhm.
This phenomenon is usually discussed in a period of time between 1910 to 1950.
Right.
What a lot of people don't often talk about is the second Great Migration. There
Mhm.
was another Great Migration that starts in the 1940s that goes into the 1960s of
Right.
blacks leaving the South,
Right.
moving into the North, because what's happening is starting in the 1930s and 40s, because of technology, sharecropper labor starts to become obsolete in the South,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
You have black folk starting to move up in large numbers in the
Mhm.
50s and 60s. But what ends up happening as this correlates with the civil rights movement, right? People
Right.
don't know deindustrialization is starting in the 50s. Why? Because as white workers are moving out to the suburbs because of the expanding of interstate highways and real estate development because of the New Deal,
Mhm.
factories are starting to leave the major cities and move out to the suburbs. And because black people can't buy those houses, they're trapped in cities where those jobs don't exist anymore. And that's why we start to see a rise in urban crime in the 60s.
Mhm. Um, and it's the way I see it too. It's like you look at the disco scene may have been like a pressure valve for the black community. It's like it's like the music was an outlet. It was like, when we're dealing with all of this, the BS in the factories and everything else, there was that sense of community that you would get hanging out in the clubs together, basically.
Well,
You
this is the
know.
thing, though. This is where I wanted to take it, though.
Hmm.
Disco is also the first black musical iteration born in neoliberalism.
Yeah, yeah. It could be said
That's
that.
that's an amazing point
It could be
because
said.
go ahead,
Go ahead,
Jeremiah.
bro.
Sorry. No, I'm sorry, Jeremiah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, that could be said. I mean, I think to some extent, um, I usually connected more with, like I said, the jazz musicians who may have been more attached to that. I mean, because a lot of the jazz guys, to some extent, may have be considered like in that vein. The upper class. I mean, guys who, I mean, if you go back to jazz, the difference between jazz and blues when jazz started, it was like the blacks who were moving into the middle class. You look at blues. Blues started in this country. You had the black middle class started, and black people started teaching their kids piano lessons. They started doing classical music and things like that. Now, some of these kids, when they grew up, they started going back to the juke joints, and hanging with, in the brothels, and started playing music with the people there. And the music standard at the time may have been blues, but then they started mixing a little bit of what they learned, classical music and things there, into what they were playing, making the music more complex. And then that is what jazz came out of. And to some extent, I guess you could say with disco, the way I see it is that it was something that grew. It was going that way because, like when you were talking about chic earlier, there was a movement to say, to kind of, I mean, chic in itself, the whole concept, if you look at that, they were trying to like clean themselves up in a way. It's like we are chic, we're black, we're not necessarily street hood or something like that. There's more to black people than this, you know, the typical street stuff. We're chic. We're, you know, um, we have high level ideas, whatever, however you want
We're,
to
we're
put it.
smart musicians.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
that's what I felt that music was. It was proggy funk. Would you agree with
Right.
that?
Yeah. It was progressive funk. It was just like I said, it's like take it to the next level. Let's show more to this than just the funk. Take the funk, add our complexity to it.
But the
You
thing
know,
is,
add
though, we're going to talk about disco. Let's talk about what's the precursor to disco. What gives birth to disco? Hi-fi soul music of the 70s.
Yeah. And like I said, when they started trying to add some of the Afro Caribbean rhythms, Afro Latin rhythms into the music, the soul of that time, that's what disco came out of. It was just like it was sort of like a different part of the genre. You know, it was just like there was soul music, but then they started saying, okay, we're going to make these tracks with some congas and some bongos, and those rhythms that they would take the traditional Afro Latin rhythms and build on top of that, but put soul music on top of it. It's like
Right.
somebody
Now,
mentioned South Soul as being a record label that was quintessential for disco. The whole thing is salsa soul. That's what salsa soul comes from. It's like a mixture of salsa. Sorry, it's like the mixture of salsa and soul.
well, let's not forget, disco pretty much gets born in New York City. It
Yeah,
starts in New York City, it goes to
yeah,
Philly as well.
yeah,
So, to your larger point, the presence of the Afro Latino urban phenomenon in New York has a
yes,
lot of influence
yes,
in post civil rights black music, disco, house, and hip hop,
yes, yeah, um,
right? So we
yeah,
see this confluence. But the thing
mhm,
about what I want to get to the political economy, right? What's really important for me is that in when this is happening, New York City is broke,
yeah,
destitute, right? You have
yep,
all of these people of all these quote unquote minorities, blacks, Latinos, all of them who are newly beneficiaries of the civil rights movement,
hmm,
right?
yes,
After the assassinations of COINTELPRO, after the riots and the rebellions,
hmm,
yes, you start to see phenomenon like Soul Train and all that stuff. You also still have that kind of cultural nationalism. You still that's
hmm,
still around. People wearing dashikis and
right,
getting back to the drums. Don't
right,
let's not forget the role of the Black Arts Movement. We have to do a whole show on the Black Arts Movement.
yes,
The Black Arts Movement that comes out of the 70s with the poets, Amiri Baraka, all of that
yeah,
stuff
yes.
in that cultural milieu.
Gil
So
Scott
there's a
Heron.
whole kind of
Oh, so true. He said Gil Scott Heron.
Gil Scott
That's
Herring,
poet.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? You got
Hmm,
Gil Scott Herring, Nikki Giovanni, you
hmm,
got oh
Audre
my god, I
Lorde,
can't believe the revolution will not be no the brothers who are like
Last Poets,
the last poets,
Audre Lorde.
or that whole vibe that
and
comes with
that's
that the Black Arts Movement. All of that is going on. All of this cultural kind of manifestation of Black
mhm,
social activity is coming about, where at the same time, the actual politics of the movement is dissipating.
okay. That you know, I am not as good at speaking to that part of the politics with this. You know, I'm, but I do look at it like there with that movement. It started with some of those things like you're saying, like I was saying, Gil Scott Heron. You know, we were talking about the music. If you listen to his album, "It's Your World," that can be one of the building blocks of disco. I mean, there's actually so many house music songs that sampled from that album.
Say it again for the people in the back.
Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out. You can catch the live stream of This Is Revolution every Tuesday through Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time and Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. This is Revolution.